This film depicts many aspects of the work, associations and recreations of the WAAAF during World War II. The commentary is by Mrs. William Caldwell, OBE, who also compiled the film. As Gwen Stark, she served in the WAAAF from its formation on the 15th of March 1941 until September 1946, attaining the rank of Wing Officer.
On the 15th of March 1941, the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force was created. It is on that date each year its members hold birthday celebrations. What you see now is the march past of the officers and airwomen serving in Townsville, North Queensland, on the 15th of March 1943. We had been reviewed by the Air Officer Commanding, and each of us was proud of the fact that we were members of the first Women's Auxiliary Service ever to be formed in Australia. The men of the RAF had always been praised for their marching and their immaculate turnout, but you can see that the women upheld their standards. We felt we were rather super. In May 1941, Claire Stevenson took up the responsibility of being the director of the WAAF. An able administrator, approachable, direct and energetic, she welded the WAAF into an effective component of the RAAF. She was known throughout the service as the WAAF and returned to civil life in 1946, having reached the rank of Group Officer. The WAAF soon learnt that to keep those short-sleeved shirts looking smart in the steaming tropics, packets and packets of starch were needed. They obtained these from their friends in the American PX store, which was set up to supply the nearby United States 5th Air Force. Black shoes, khaki skirts, and hats fur felt made up the tropical uniform. After the formality of spit and polish of the march past, competitive sports provided a happy and boisterous get-together, and lots of rivalry between the units. In the races for the WAAF-RAF pairs, partners were chosen well before the events, and serious practice had to be put in beforehand. The wheelbarrow race was always exciting. The women were the barrows and the men the drivers. And the boys, for some reason or other, always wanted to be the drivers. Serious concentration was required for the slow bicycle race. The last over the line was the winner. There was always loud barracking during the ball games as supporters cheered their unit teams on to success. The wife of the then Governor-General of Australia, Her Excellency the Lady Gowrie, had been appointed Honorary Air Commandant, the highest ranking WAAF officer in Australia. She inspected our units in the northern area. Our DWAAF was always grateful for her intense practical interest, and WAAF throughout Australia responded to the sincerity she showed during her inspections. Airwomen enlisted in the musterings driver motor transport had to pass the same trade test as men and were recognized as good drivers of tractors, trucks and tenders, as well as ambulances and staff cars. Dedicated drivers cared for their vehicles, whether they were staff cars or trucks. Petrol distribution had to be strictly controlled and rules obeyed. One driver always had her mascot with her as she handled the mail runs. This lot was due out for New Guinea. Magnetic Island, only 8 miles off the coast from Townsville. Here the troops could go swimming, climbing, and walking, etc. Swimming togs were in short supply, and clothing coupons very hard to come by. So the girls made these costumes themselves from odd bits of material. After a while, a welfare section was set up on the island with the help of the Comforts Fund, YWCA and Salvation Army. With plenty of sporting equipment and a good canteen, it became a mecca for hundreds of servicemen and women on their stand-down day. And many a romance started there at magical Magnetic. I don't go much on mussels myself, but the girls seem to like them, a change from the food in the barracks. You have no idea what Captain Curtis of the Salvation Army carried in that truck. There was paper and envelopes for writing letters home, handcraft materials, books, sporting equipment, and an assortment of articles in constant demand. Always on the job, with a ready smile and a cheery word, Cappy, as she was known, was much loved and respected by all personnel. These unlined tin huts, typical of WAAAF accommodation on the RAAF country stations, needed coloured extras to pretty them up. The WAAF painted them, put up curtains, and planted gardens to give them a homely touch. The morale of a unit is often dependent on the quality and service of the food. Some of the personnel who did make a happy unit. Mess stewards in their spotless starched jackets and cooks in working clothes. Hundreds of these masterings were stationed all over Australia, some away in the bush, others in towns and cities in buildings requisitioned for wartime use. Just off the midnight to morning shift, these highly skilled signal staff go off to the beach to wind down with open-air exercise before attempting to sleep during the tropical daylight heat. There was considerable nerve strain from the high concentration needed by the teleprinter, wireless and radar operators, and only a high degree of physical fitness made it possible for these young women to work effectively. Physical training sessions, at least once a week, were an essential part of our program, and I like to think the girls thoroughly enjoyed them. Hundreds of WAAAF around Australia worked in the fighter sectors plotting aircraft movements. These girls, after an 8-hour shift, collect their mess kits and move off to a welcome breakfast. These are typical washing machines of our service days. We called them Sawyer boilers. The sun was our very effective drying machine. in this light-hearted manner built confidence. There was absolutely no sign of panic when the enemy planes really did come over this area. Here I am with the CO of the fighter sector, Wing Commander Stevens, and his two WAAAF officers, Section Officer Rowland and Assistant Section Officer Smith. In the grounds of the sick quarters, nursing orderlies take round morning tea, gratefully accepted by those in the convalescent stage. With detailed attention given to good working conditions, good messing, physical fitness, and a variety of organised activities, these quarters were never overpopulated. Medical Officer, Flight Lieutenant Joan Beattie, whose special care was the WAAF in the northeastern area, and Nursing Sister Molly Sullivan, both members of the RAAF and not the WAAF. There was only one swimming enclosure at Townsville, and it became a popular meeting place for service personnel. After the day's work and barrack chores and personal tasks were done, it was a rush for a swim. At Parks, New South Wales, an operational training unit where the WAAF backed up these instructors and fighter pilot trainees. Air Commodore Frank Lucas, the Air Officer commanding No. 2 Training Group. After Townsville, I came south and joined his staff as Senior WAAF Officer. At Rathmines Flying Boat Base, Lake Macquarie, 2 Catalina pilots, Wing Commander Belitho and Squadron Leader Gray. What WAAFs wouldn't have worked till they dropped to carry out their orders? At Williamtown Operational Training Station, pilots returned from active service to train Beaufighter pilots. Wing Commander Chad Martin, the tall one in the leather jacket, and Squadron Leader Charles Crombie with the leather cap, both Battle of Britain pilots. WAAFs were stationed at all these units. Mustering in the WAAF increased to 73 different trades. These armourers at Williamtown, New South Wales, are fitting fins and heads to rockets to be used in bullfighters. Everyone, men and women, wore blue jeans and berets as working dress in the tarmac area. the armourers are now putting the rockets into position on a bullfighter. Whispering Death was a very apt description applied to bullfighters in New Guinea by the Japanese. Mechanics and armourers on a wing of a Spitfire at RAAF Station Parks. An instrument repairer talks over a problem with a warrant officer, and then she's into the cockpit of a Kitty Hawk to check the instrument panel. Regular inspections of these instruments followed every flight. The aim of WAAAF was to integrate the airwomen into the Air Force. WAAF had to undergo and succeed in the same trade courses as the men. They had to share the same working conditions, and the jobs held by the members of the technical musterings had to be interchangeable, marked either RAAF or WAAF. So on a job, the team might be 3 men, 3 women, or any mixture of technicians to get the job done. In the workshop, these girls carried out highly complex instrument repairs, but the high point was to sit in the cockpit testing the instruments. Flight riggers on tailwheel repair of a Kitty Hawk. The WAAF during this inspection would also be responsible for checking hydraulics in the landing gear and brakes, and in addition to other duties. Mechanics working on the engines of a Kitty Hawk. It was indeed a rare occasion when a man had to be called to loosen a tight nut or a spark plug. Major engine overhauls were done in the workshops. The Kitty Hawk was the first true fighter plane flown by the RAAF in Australia. During tail inspection on a Spitfire. A good lineup of Spitfires awaiting daily inspection. Attention being given to greasing elevator control bearings and changing a spark plug. The biggest thrill for the WAAF was when the pilot said, "Okay, sit on her tail and we'll run her up." Splicing and joining wires attached to the controls of aircraft is pretty tough on the hands, but it was a job that had to be tackled in a workmanlike manner. aircraft hands busy on the tarmac area. Flight mechanics engaged on servicing the Australian-built Wirraway. This single-engine plane served as a trainer for fighter pilots. They were used as a fighter plane over Moresby, but were no match for the Japanese Zero. Electricians' duties included examining and wiring batteries, generators and fuses. Aircraft hands were employed in steam cleaning planes. They knew that every bit of mud had to be removed to ensure top performance of the aircraft. The tarmac area on an Air Force station produced some traffic problems, causing drivers to be constantly on the alert. The transport drivers drove the tractors, maneuvering planes into the correct positions. Stitching the blind flying hoods used on Wirraways. Who could do a sewing job better than the girls? The first WAAFs engaged on an aircraft were fabric workers. Their duties called for stitching fabric to the framework, repairing tears, patching and doping. By doping is meant the application of specially prepared paint to the surface. This record was taken outdoors at Rathmines Lake Macquarie. Normally this work is carried out in a hangar. Any initial fears of the capacity of women to replace men in technical jobs in the WAAF was quickly dispelled when the girls' efficiency and dedication became evident. When the fabric becomes taut, it has to be cut in the appropriate places to permit free movement of controls. These shots were taken at the WAAF station, Richmond, New South Wales, where the headquarters of the Army Paratroop Training Unit was established. WAAFs worked with them as parachute folders. Different coloured parachutes were used for dropping medical supplies, ammunition and weapons. The white chutes for air crews. Parachutes just had to function. No one doubted that highly skilled, responsible workers were employed for this job. The chute being packed was the type used by air crews. Regular inspection of this equipment was carried out to ensure that no defects had developed in any of the materials. A packed chute for airmen contains a label denoting the packer's name, and if returned to the operator, it indicated that the wearer had bailed out safely. What a thrill it was for a WAAF who had a label sent back to her. She received a memento of a wooden packing stick inscribed with her name and the date. Many WAAF received this treasured reward. Outdoor packing was only resorted to for the purpose of obtaining this film. All work on parachutes was done on the long tables in the hangars. A group of WAAF officers billeted at the Strand Barracks in Townsville, northern Queensland. Flight Officer Speed, the officer in charge of the Signals Barracks. Flight Officer Francis, officer in charge of the Headquarters Barracks. There were 3 RAAF squadrons based in Townsville. Number 7 Squadron, Wing Commander Keith Parsons, DFC, their commanding officer. They flew Beaufort bombers. The Beaufort was also used for reconnaissance work around Australia and the islands. Number 41 Squadron, Wing Commander John Hampshire, DFC, was the CO of this squadron, the Empire Flying Boat Squadron. Number 36 Squadron, Wing Commander Harry Purvis, AFC, was the commanding officer. It was a transport squadron flying DC-3s, well known as the Biscuit Bombers. There are 2 sides to a service life. You had to do your work properly and you had to be able to relax properly. I was always keen on off-duty activity, and we put on several reviews up north. For the ballerinas, it was a 6 a.m. rise for practice 3 or 4 times a week. This particular review ran for 6 nights in Townsville, then we took it to Charters Towers and made £2,000 for the Welfare Fund. Where did we get those attractive costumes? J.C. Williamson's provided them. It was exciting for the girls to get into pretty feminine costumes after spending so much time in khaki. They could hardly believe their eyes when they saw themselves in the mirrors. Our lovely prima donna, Corporal Alice Loader, an accomplished soprano whose talent was very much appreciated. The ballet produced by the Signals Unit was something different. Airmen and airwomen who worked on the same shift together, dancing to so-called Eastern music. No review is complete without a male ballet, and this is the RAAF Officers' Ballet. Mostly the chaps from headquarters, a couple of well-known medical men, squadron leaders, flying officers. Their tutus were made of starched mosquito net. Their brassiers were the tops of mess tins painted red, white and blue and tied together with parachute elastic. Their wigs were made of teased rope, and the beautiful ballet shoes were airmen's boots. The corps de ballet may be a little irregular in size and shape, but their hilarious performance never failed to achieve repeated curtain calls. Wing Commander Stevens, the principal medical officer of the northeastern area, one of our leading ballerinas. In 1941-46 were memorable years for the 27,000 women who served in the WAAAF. Their contribution to the war effort made history. My thanks to the RAAF Visual Section and my very good friends in the United States 5th Air Force for supplying film making this record possible.